Thank you all for coming to this incredible event and incredible venue. My name's Megan Tom. I am the advancement coordinator here at the NDN Collective, and I also want to take a moment and just recognize we are 13 floors above Lenni Lenape territory, and although we are up in the air, we are still on Lenni Lenape territory. But I just definitely wanted to speak that into just existence and understanding that although it's Climate Week, we're here and we are visitors on this land. But I definitely wanted to welcome you all here. We are the NDN Collective. My fellow colleagues are here in the audience and just working and doing the work that we're all here to do. And we are a Indigenous-led organization dedicated to building Indigenous power. And we are based in Rapid City, South Dakota. I've spoken to a few of you who have wondered where we are from and based, and it is Rapid City, South Dakota, but I myself, as well as my other colleagues, are spread out throughout the United States, or what is known as the United States. And we are just doing the work, and three things we do really well: increasing access to resources, providing culturally relevant capacity building services to Indigenous peoples, as well as helping Indigenous peoples and communities set their own agenda. And that in itself, as an organization and a nonprofit, that is really important for us to be Indigenous practitioners, as well as people and culture bearers, as well as movement people who are involved with this work. And we're just really fortunate and incredibly blessed to do this work. And with that, we also have within the audience our climate justice team, which is one of the 4 campaigns that the NDN Collective provides support, as well as hosts within the NDN Collective as part of the NDN Actions team. The NDN Actions team is part of our ecosystem, and as part of that ecosystem, we have a communications arm that is changing the narrative, one article, as well as one live stream and video at a time. And also I am representing the advancement division that works to provide access and resources to our grantees and organizations. But with that, we are really excited to host this panel, as well as have you all read and see the book in real life. This is my first time seeing the book, so I am super excited to have one of those in my hands for the first time. But with that, I would love to pass it on to the Climate Justice Director and my fellow colleague, Jade Begay. So, Jade, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks, Megan, for that beautiful intro, and thank you everyone for being here. Yeah, I want to give an overview of the Climate Justice Campaign, but first I just want to thank all the support in the room, and also just put name and faces, or faces to the names of our team. So there's Kailea and myself from the Climate Justice team. We have Toka over there, if you can give us a wave. Willie in the back on our Indigenous-led media. Marty back here holding it down as DJ, and also our digital organizer. So yeah, this is a part of the NDN ecosystem for our campaign, our team, our climate justice team. This is our first event since launching. We're NDN's newest campaign or program within the collective. And as Megan started to kind of unpack, NDN Collective, we're just one aspect of this big ecosystem. And we do, just to say, we do C3 work with advocacy and our campaigns and NDN Action, but we also do impact investment and loans. So if you are able to check out the gallery space over, sorry, I don't know where to put this, but if you are able to check out that little gallery space over behind this pillar, there's a bunch of organizations that we partner with and support through our either NDN Foundation or NDN Fund, which are our arms that move resources and build capacity in Indian countries so that our people are resourced to lead and really lean into this Indigenous dream of building solutions for us, by us. So as I said earlier, we're a new campaign. We launched officially in July, the first week of July. And since then, we did most of our celebration, and our entire launch happened digitally. So this is the first time we've been able to gather and celebrate our campaign. So we're really glad you're here with us to also celebrate the launch of the book, which we hope you were all able to view and get a feel for over on the table. And I know we had issues with our little merchandise setup, so I think it's been resolved. And shout out to LJ, a dear friend who's been holding it down with the book and just so much support. It's resolved now, so I encourage you to go over there and check it out. Just wanted to share a little overview of the campaign. Climate justice, defined by Indigenous dreaming, is an invitation into complexity, a surrendering to the truth, a reckoning with extractive society in order to revitalize possibility. We must dream the Indigenous dream, and so we dream climate justice. Our campaign builds power throughout Indigenous communities in order to tackle the climate crisis. Our team runs and supports campaigns aimed at ending extraction, contamination, and violence in our territories. We advance policy changes, coalition building, advocacy while supporting the solutions-based work happening across our nations that utilize traditional ecological knowledge in order to develop climate adaptive solutions. So that's a bit about our work, and I encourage you to, pick up one of our flyers. They're all across the space here. We also shared with you, we have a couple offerings I just want to highlight. So our flyers, our brochure that goes into detail about our campaign are sprinkled around. So our coloring books, those are free for you to take home and share with your family. It's really important that our campaign is accessible to all the generations. So the coloring book is a way to share some of our vision, some of our climate justice dream, our Indigenous dream, on paper and with children and elders and everyone in between. We also have swag sprinkled around. Feel free to pick something up and take it home with you. And then, we're here to celebrate the book, as I mentioned, and the book launch. So I just want to pass it over to Kailea to share a bit about the book, and then we can move into the panel.
Thank you, Jade. Esiet Kailea Frederick. I'm Tahltan, Casca, and also a Black American. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the editor of Required Reading, and also I'll be moderating the panel this evening. And I just, this event is serving as a twofold. I wanted to just give a little brief intro to how Required Reading even came about. It started out as a blog series. Jade, my director, tasked me with sitting down and writing out a blog series for our launch. And I spent maybe an hour, and at the end of the hour, I realized, this is more than a blog series. Actually, what I have here in my hands, I think, is a book. And this was in June, so I pitched her the idea. And I do want to just preface by saying that I'm definitely an organizer and that I live in emergence, but I'm also an editor for an independent publishing space called Loam, which served as our publisher for Required Reading. And so there's also a part of me that is just really versed and exercised in putting together bodies of material like this. But I will also say that this was the fastest thing I've ever put together in terms of concept to a physical print book that you can take home with you. So Required Reading, Climate Justice, Adaptation, and Investing Indigenous Power, it really seeks to serve to fill a gap in terms of what is out there and available on bookshelves right now. what are climate solutions that Indigenous communities, Indigenous peoples inherently hold? What are their perspectives? What are our perspectives right now around how we're even understanding this current moment in time that we find ourselves in? And how do people who are non-Indigenous allies engage with us? How to be in a conversation with us in this moment in time of reparations and dismantling and also great rebuilding. And so that is what required reading, that was the goal, was to put together something that I could hand over and say, this is actually how our communities feel about what is going on. This is the ways that we are currently being harmed, but also these are the solutions that we are also practicing across our nations. We need investment, we need the opportunity to be given a seat at the table, and we need to be listened to. And so that's a bit of what is within those pages. And I want to say that so much heart and so many hands went into putting this book together. It's truly a compilation of essays from incredible thinkers and doers and activists and people that are in implementing policy. And so all to say that I had the honor of doing the editing and the curation and the production work alongside my team, but that those who fill the pages, Jade is featured in there, and but just to say that I wish they were here with us and that they really are through the pages in this book. So many voices are with us this evening. So I'd love to actually now pivot over to this panel that I have the honor of moderating, Libertary Solutions to the Climate Crisis. So our team thought, while we're here in the city, there are people here who we look up to, people whose analysis and critique we are consistently listening to and learning alongside. And so we wanted to invite a few of our people to sit up here and have the opportunity to be in conversation. So Nicole Carty is a movement and strategist, digital organizer, campaigner, and trainer. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, Nicole has over a decade of experience studying and supporting movements to further racial, gender, and economic justice. As a movement practitioner in Occupy Wall Street and the Movement for Black Lives, and a strategist and core team member at Momentum, Nicole has spent her career developing her craft regarding what makes movements strategic, impactful, and successful. I wanted to share a little bit as well about Project Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations. We have a few people as well who are part of this movement. Maybe you want to raise your hands that are here in the audience with us. Hey. So Project Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations is building a people-powered intersectional mass movement to surface the origins of our inequalities and dismantle the policies and narratives that keep us divided and push for reparations that will heal our relationships and our democracy. Not casual. Celine is a Lebanese-Canadian designer, writer, advocate, and public speaker. She is the founder of Slow Factory, a 501c3 public service organization that's working at the intersection of environmental and social justice, which produces a conference series promoting sustainability literacy called Study Hall, and the first science-driven incubator in fashion called 1x1. She's on the Council of Progressive International, has been a Director's Fellow of MIT Media Lab, and served on the Board of Directors of AIGA-NY, a nonprofit membership organization that helps cultivate the future of design in New York City. So welcome, Celine.
Thank you.
And then we have Jade Begay. As you all heard, she leads our climate justice campaign here at NDN Collective and brings extensive experience working in climate justice movements spaces throughout Turtle Island and within Indigenous communities across the globe. Jade sits on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council and has also worked as a multimedia producer, filmmaker, and communications professional working in nonprofit and Indigenous organizations. Really grateful to work with you. So, Nicole, I'd love to start with asking about Project Truth Reconciliations and Reparations, because TR&R is really a project about understanding the social foundations upon which we are all situated in this country. How and what is this project reconciling in order to support the conditions for climate justice? And why do we need to be grappling with our history in order to achieve climate and social justice?
Thought that was going to be casual, turning that on, but it was not. Thank you for that question, Kailea. Apologies, everyone, for that technical difficulty. Wow, it's been a while since panels have been happening, right? Okay. Happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And what a question. Why is it important to grapple with our history? What is important about reconciling that sets up climate justice? A lot, I would say. I think there are some pretty key ways in which we've been thinking about a lot of things wrong. So I'm sure all of you have heard of, all of our struggles are connected, right? We've heard that before. If you're in the left, probably you've heard that. And we feel this and we know this, but I think we haven't really deeply interrogated the ways in which our struggles are really connected. And part of what we're trying to do in Project Truth and Reconciliation and Reparations is really identify where some of these ideologies that we kind of think live in people's hearts or have always been there actually came from. And when you begin to dig under the surface, you begin to see that the systems that say we should oppress women and they shouldn't have rights, or we should extract from the environment, or black people are less human, or we should be able to take land from Native people, are all fundamentally around the same things. They're about power and they're about wealth. And so in tracing back the design of these systems and the design of these ideologies, we actually are in a position to build stronger movements that can actually allow us to come together and build the power that is necessary to overcome these huge struggles in front of us. I mean, right now I think we're all having the experience of this crisis and abortion ban in Texas and climate catastrophe and police murder, and we know they're connected, but we haven't really been able to plug it and synthesize it together. And so part of what is really useful about going back in history is being able to identify and see the choices that were made by specific people to craft these ideologies, the choices that were made to create systems that legitimize the dehumanization of people, the systems that legitimize the extraction of, at-home labor and the subjugation of women, or the control of reproductive rights and the extraction of the environment. They were all decisions that were made by people in order to enable their own profit, their own wealth, and keep people divided and confused and scrambling for resources. And so that's part of what we're trying to get to the bottom of at Project Truth and Reconciliation and Reparations. And we're really trying to assert that this stuff is not just in the past, it's in the present. We haven't actually interrupted any of this stuff, even though we don't have formalized slavery anymore. These systems are still with us, and it requires corrective justice, it requires reparations, it requires us doing things to undo the damage and legacies of these systems in order to build a future where we can have clean air and water and have a say over the things that matter in our life and feel like we can control our futures, which is not what we have right now. So that's kind of the big task that our movement is trying to come at, and we have been building it really with this intersectionality in mind. And so even though this project has been started by Black women, we've built a team of multiracial organizers. Jade is on our team, Kailea is on our support circle, really trying to tackle how are we going to solve this problem and how can we actually create the frames to invite all of us into it and to see our role in advancing this new future and securing this corrective justice. So we're trying to have a foundation and seed why climate justice is related to patriarchy, ending white supremacy, ending extraction, and draw those linkages. So that's my short answer, and we'll get into it a bit more in future questions.
I was just about to write down, see our role. That was like really what came forward for me. It's challenging to be able to see ourselves, and it's challenging for us to be able to understand ourselves as a collective body, and then add on to that, how do we see ourselves as a collective society? That's hard.
It's definitely hard, but that's also part of the strategy, right? That we don't actually see ourselves as people who have shared stake in this earth and in this future, right? And so what we forget, and what I've noticed a lot, is that we tend to write ourselves out of history a lot. We tend to not see all of the people who came before us, who made it possible for us to be here, made it possible for us to speak out in the ways that we're able to speak out. And I think part of how we can support ourselves to reimagine ourselves as a collective is to identify those people who came before us and identify our legacy that we get to choose into, we get to choose and opt into in order to make a better future, right? So lifting up the Frederick Douglasses, who back, in the 19th century understood the interconnectedness between women's rights and Native rights and Black rights, right? And so pulling out those ancestors and then choosing them collectively to move forward. It's a hard task, but the reason why it's hard was always part of the plan. And so coming together, seeing our shared stakes, seeing our role is actually critical in us being able to move forward. And the reasons why that feels hard aren't accidental. They're part of the strategy for keeping things as they are.
Thank you for that reminder on ancestry and lineage and legacy and origin stories. I got chicken skin. So Celine, as a child refugee who had to flee your home country of Lebanon, and as someone who brings a multitude of perspectives forward because of this experience, how and where do you see crossover with what your country has been and is currently going through when reflecting on some of the core truths that Project TR&R is unveiling around our relationships to power and justice?
Thank you so much for having me. What an honor. Thank you so much, Jade, for thinking of me. I was like, what are we going to talk about? And I had no idea, so thank you for that. And thank you so much, Nicole, for your wonderful work and everything you just said. I was feeling there's so many interconnectedness between what we're doing. But in answering your question, for me, it was a personal story that ended up becoming a universal mission in a way where as you said, I came to North America as a refugee when I was 5, and because we were fleeing the war, and that kind of shaped the way that my relationship to America began. And then we, of course, when we lived in America, we, survived a lot of prejudice and racism, and again, the Arab identity is in itself kind of on a dispute whether or not it's a race or not, but there's definitely a lot of prejudice that comes with this identity. And then my parents never felt at home there, so they wanted to go back to Lebanon. And so at 13, we go back to Lebanon when the war ended, and living that life in between two worlds, if you will, like between the East and the West, has really shaped the way that I work. And I think that the best way to describe it is a bit like an ambassador or a diplomat, but I'm not neither of those. I'm definitely a troublemaker and not at all a diplomat, and I struggle with that tremendously, but I'm at the forefront of two cultures that are not agreeing with each other or not seeing each other, and specifically the global North not seeing the global South, not understanding its responsibility. And I think the work with Progressive International really was something that solidified this idea that it's about internationalism at the end of the day, what you were saying about if you're in the left, you all feel like we're all part of the same struggle. There's the global majority, as we like to say at the Slow Factory, but the Slow Factory existed definitely to create a common language between all of us, because we have not been socialized to live with each other. And again, there's not even the same language. We have to resort to English just for us to be able to be understood, and for all of us actually. And some of us have just English because we were completely erased, culturally erased, oppressed, so that our language is lost. And so even I see that in my own culture, how my language is getting lost. Like my name is Celine, you know, I'm not French. And so it was years and years of oppression and, you know, colonialism. And I discussed these issues as well in my personal career through Slow Factory. And the body of work we aim to build is this, this progressive front, this collective, you know, knowledge, if you will, that we can build together and document, because we are not really invited to work together, and we are not invited to look at our knowledge as knowledge. Our knowledge is, look, you can look at Orientalism, for example. I'm sure you both can identify how the West and how colonialism has categorized your ancestral knowledge as lesser than, or discredited your knowledge, discredited the fact that it wasn't up to par to the white European knowledge that is a very young, if you want, civilization at the end of the day, and has a lot of holes into it. So it's kind of interesting. So the body of work the Slow Factory aims to build is this collective library of knowledge, this open education, as we call it, where it's taught and led by people of the global majority. Even to name it as people of the global majority, we oftentimes identify ourselves with our oppression, with our own pain. Our trauma becomes our identity. And so with the work that we've been doing with others, we realize that, well, no, that's not true. That's not how we are. This is not our identity. Maybe there's another way to describe ourselves. And even the label BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, is a colorist term, but which, of course, I understand must exist. I'm not saying we're not going to use it, but again, it's playing with the same terminologies that were given to us, that's segmented us and separated us, and it also builds on a lot of horizontal hostility that exists within our groups. And again, how do we deal with that? How do we build coalition? How do we work with one another? And I guess that's the invitation that is the Slow Factory. Is we don't know how, but we kind of have an idea. And I think that what you were saying is to have the opportunity to lead within our own world, to lead these solutions, to try at least, and to make our own mistakes, because we're not even allowed to make those mistakes. You know, we're put to especially as an immigrant person, you have zero chance, okay? You have negative chance, so you have to perform, you have to work 20 times as hard, you have to learn English, you have to understand the lingo, the slang, you can't say that because that's not your culture, but you have to say that, you have to understand that, but you cannot say it, and it's so complicated, and you can make mistakes, and so on and so forth. And the idea is to make these mistakes, to own these mistakes that we make, and I think that's the power that we can give ourselves, is to try and to lead and to make mistakes and to continue building coalition with each other, you know. So that's a bit the work that we try to do.
I'm appreciating how you keep coming back to building. And, you know, I feel so often in our social movements, you know, one of the critiques that's kind of put on us is, why are you always trying to tear down and to dismantle? And so often, like, I wake up every day so aware that I'm building, you know, that's actually what I'm doing, is I'm building infrastructure and I'm building systems and ultimately building power. And Jade, you know, that's our mission here at NDN, is to build Indigenous power, and you know, throughout Indian country, but also beyond the so-called colonial borders of the US. So I would love if you could speak to the role of reconciliation within this power building, specifically when working towards climate justice. And how is NDN dismantling power within land ownership, politics, and philanthropy?
Yeah, I'll move through the first one and actually tie it back to this idea of seeing ourselves. I think for NDN Collective, we're not so much concerned with like reconciling colonialism outside of our like our target audiences aren't white folks or aren't the colonizer, so to speak, and more it's about how can we reconcile with each other? How do we heal the division that has been caused by colonization? How do we heal the scarcity that has been built by colonization? So I think through our model, which is a systems approach, so as you know, as we've mentioned over this panel, NDN is a collective. We have multiple arms. We have a for-profit, a nonprofit, a CDFI, which is a community development, CDFI, community development financial institution. We're building a school in South Dakota that is like Indigenous led and and we organize, shout out to Megan, where is Megan? We're organizing in philanthropy to move resources directly to our communities. 1.4%, not even like 1%, 0.4 of philanthropic dollars in the US goes to Indigenous communities. And so when you do the math, and when bringing it to climate justice, when you think about climate scientists and us as, you know, informed people, when you know that like Indigenous peoples protect 80% of the biodiversity in the world, and we only get a sliver of a sliver of a sliver of our funding, it just doesn't make sense. So we work we work in philanthropy and the foundation world to dismantle white supremacy in those spaces and to open the floodgates of resources to our communities. I mentioned earlier in this little gallery, we have all of these organizations and partners and programs that we support and work with, wind farms, a buffalo wildlife sanctuary that builds jobs while bringing back the buffalo. There's a bunch of solutions over there. I encourage you to go check them out. So that's how we're, I think, working on this idea of seeing ourselves, you know, we have a saying at NDN Collective, when Indigenous peoples are resourced and network, we can change the world. And we want to be able to, continue to like share these examples with our community and say, you can do this. You have the knowledge. In fact, like it's your knowledge that's going to save all of us. So through our channels, through our platforms, through our media, we want to just be continuing to share the examples that, you know, we have access, we have resources. NDN has a foundation where we are supporting change makers with I'll just speak to this one program because it's never happened in country. I'm from Indian country and I've never seen things happen on this scale, but our change maker grant, it's a yearly cycle, 20 people from Indian country or also across the medicine line up in Canada and down south in Mexico, and also the some of our colonies like Puerto Rico and American Samoa are welcome to these programs. But 20 people yearly get each $75K to invest in themselves. And you know that I just mentioned that number because it's big. It's big for Indian country to get this type of investment. Like I said, it's never happened before. So yes, just trusting our people, putting resources in their hands to lead, and then that's one way where we're working on reconciling the scarcity stuff in our community. Putting faith and trust into our people, and then I think also touching on the building power. That's how we're building power. Moving resources. It's a big one.
I think we just did some really incredible mapping, you know, hearing the three of you speaking, and just all of these different areas, you know, within our collective society that each of you are trying to, you know, touch. And I mostly actually what I hear is like people who have really big hearts. But I wanted to come back to you, Nicole. I love that one of the ways that you describe yourself in your bio, at least, is as a movement practitioner. So as a movement practitioner, I'd love to hear a little bit about your read of this moment that we're in. You know, and we're in a moment. I think we all know all the reasons why. But what is this moment ripe for? Where are our gaps? And what systems do we need to be building? As well as what does support from quote unquote outside of the movement need to look like?
Just easy questions, really. I feel like I have to ask, like, well, how much of a downer do you want me to be when I answer this question? Yeah, I think this is, okay, the reason why this moment is happening is because we're about to win. Like, if nothing else was happening, if our opposition wasn't actually gonna like ignite a full-fledged effort to like divide us, break us apart, like most people are on the same side at this point. They wanna see the solutions, they wanna see the change. We're kind of on the same page about like, yeah, I think broadly people should be treated with dignity and respect. Like most of us are there. And so the huge outcry that we're seeing is a death rattle. It's a very strong death rattle. It's very coordinated. It's very clear about what it will take to control the mechanism of power, the rules, and it wants to sort of undermine the idea that any of the rest of us should have a say in that, and not just right now, but for a generation, you know? So that is kind of the stakes. And I wanted to phrase it that way because I feel like it's really important to understand that the reason it's so aggressive is because we are on the precipice of winning. We're almost there. We had these huge protests last year that showed how many people are with us, how many people are ready to get to the root of it, to excavate, to like actually reclaim our differences, to like return the land, to like let the people lead who have always been here. And that's the context. That said, it's a coordinated effort. It's not great. It's serious. Like we're seeing full-scale attacks on states, democracies all across the country. We're seeing like a serious effort of undermining any semblance of democracy. And I think one thing that's interesting is like I was born in 1988, millennial, and I think like in the left, sometimes we're like, oh yeah, like neoliberalism, like that's the worst it could be. Like that's the worst. It's so terrible. And it is bad, but my dad grew up in Kentucky in the Jim Crow South, and that was under a fascist government. That was under like a fascist system that had no respect for Black life. And we could be there again. Like that's what happens if we don't actually pull through in this moment. It's way worse than the 90s. Like the fundamental ideas of equality that have somewhat been mainstreamed in the past number of decades are fundamentally under threat right now. And I think that that's why you're seeing these CRT fights. That's why you're seeing these efforts to rewrite history, because if you look and track fascist rises all across the country, one of the first things they do is rewrite history. Because if you control history, you can control the future. If you control a history that says this has always been for white people, then you have a future that's always been for white people. So our mere history is a threat. Our history of us actually making this country more equal, of being here, of fighting to like win all of these rights, is a threat to their future that they're trying to push, and so they're trying to erase it, pretend it never happened. The same thing is happening in India, happened in Poland, happening in Brazil, and it's all groundwork to sort of push forward a white supremacist, like genocidal tendencies, frankly. So that's not good. And yeah, I think like what I think is really needed is, one, to understand that we're in that moment. I'm not sure how widespread or clear it is, but like that is actually the moment that we're in right now. And the other is to like build power. Like we actually have to build power to take over this very imperfect system in order to like hope that of undoing the damage that's been caused. And like we have to be really clear on that and hold all of its contradictions, because like our beautiful experiments, our like ways that we hold and support each other, all of that is under threat when we have these huge systems that can just obliterate us, really, and can write the rules to make that the justification. So I think building power, and I really liked what you were saying, because I actually think that that is really missing and needed. I think we're really in a place of, the left for a number of years has really been in a place of critique and justified critique. There's a lot of things that are wrong, and like it's good to point them out, but we have to try to do something about them. And our efforts, our solutions, they're not going to be perfect. They're going to be messy. They're not going to be like pure. So creating the space for us to try and to fail, and the space for us as leaders to try, and for our communities to try who haven't ever been given the option to fail, to try, that is going to be a game changer, because without trying, there's no way we're going to even get out of this. We may as well give up. And so I would say we need to support one another to really like try to build power and try to change things and like celebrate successes. And not to say critique is not useful, but like trying is really hard. It's really vulnerable, and we should be like celebrating people who are trying. So I think those are like some cultural things that I think are really missing, and I think that is the stakes, and that's what I think we really need to do, is to like be clear about building power, even if it's really messy right now, because we just might not have a chance if we don't build power in this moment for the future. And as far as outside the movement, I mean, this is the key to building power, right? Like, there is no outside the movement. We shouldn't be saying this is the movement and that's everybody else. Like, we should be building power by bringing people in and helping them see their role in the movement, to be on our side, to make them feel they're on our side, because we need them to build this power. And so shifting that thinking of what the movement is really fundamental, because it's really great to do this work, but our role is to be pulling people in and to be building power and to be like organizing our communities who already agree with us but aren't always able to be a part of this into the power we need to win this moment.
That's so true.
I think that's yeses around the room. Yes, the absolute necessary reframe and the opportunity for invitation and the desiring for more spaciousness to try, for that vulnerability of trying. Celine, I wanted to pivot over to you. Just yesterday, and I read this little snippet you provided for a piece for Fast Company, and was totally preparing for this panel, but you shared this.
That's why you didn't share the questions.
You shared this out online, and I really like paused with it and sat with it, and I wanted to read this quote back. So, in the next decade, we will have to become fluent in reparative design and designing for chaotic events. How do we survive a tsunami? How do we design for irrigation? How do we design for topsoil regeneration? Designing for human survival will become the new necessary field of design. Knowing, Celine, that this statement is grounded in the very real experience of the fights for actual survival for all of those in your home country. I'd love to understand more about what Slow Factory's role has been in for designing for actual survival.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Nicole. I think we have to talk after because there's so many things that we do that are related to one another, especially when you asked about design and how can we design a better system. You spoke of the system, and at Slow Factory we like to teach system design, or at least system design thinking, or thinking in systems, we say, because everything that we create, whether it's a water bottle or a book or a dress or shoes, it exists within a system. So that's where this quote is about, ecosystems over aesthetics, because usually a system is a linear system that, the white man has designed through extraction, production, and then use, and then garbage, basically waste. And these linear systems, I've tried so hard to try to bend them into a circle in the beginning when I first started Slow Factory. And it was very, very hard, physically exhausting, and also impossible, not just because I was on my own, but also because those systems are everywhere, in everything. And even the notion of circularity, which is a loop that the environmental movement, or at least the sustainable fashion movement, has popularized. It's also just one loop. So at the end of the day, it's an optical illusion. It's still a linear system because it's not being regenerated. So it's an optical illusion that, look, it's circular. So we were starting to look at what does it look like if it's regenerative, because it must, whenever you take something, you have to return it. And in reading on Indigenous culture, I find a lot of words that I didn't know we needed to express. Even in my culture, we have that. When there is the notion of the gift, like when you gift something, it's not a transaction. You're not expecting something back, but it's something sacred that you have to return it. You have to do the most to return it back, So in that sense, that doesn't exist culturally in the West, and that doesn't exist culturally in capitalism at all. So all systems are, by definition, extractive models. And so the Slow Factory, through design thinking, through equity-centered design and accessibility, so designing with access in mind, so not just for able-bodied humans, but also for all humans, we look at new systems, like how can we design these systems? And that's where the idea of we turn systems into ecosystems, we like to say behind the closed doors, and we're like, do people understand what we're talking about? And then that's why I use the word ecosystems over aesthetics. And even today I had a white woman in my inbox being like, I can't believe you said that. This is so damaging that you said ecosystems over aesthetics, because aesthetics are so important. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Aesthetics are important, but not over the ecosystem. I think there should be a hierarchy of if we were to design a new system, we need to prioritize. What is it that we're prioritizing, right? And each other and the environment is the sacred that we must prioritize. So that is the priority over however it's going to look. So if you don't have that color, you're going to figure out another color, If you can't, dye it in this natural dye, then figure it out, do something else, you know what I mean? So that's the constraint. And as designers, we build constraints. That's how we are able to design. We can't design just like that. That's art. Art has no constraints, but design has tons of constraints. And those constraints are key. They define the design work. So in the work that we do at Slow Factory is defining these constraints and prioritizing them. And so that's system design. That's designing systems. And so defining the constraints, prioritizing them, understanding the mapping and understanding the system in which we exist. And it can be a microsystem. It doesn't have to be the whole world, but just right here in this microsystem, how can I be a mushroom in my ecosystem? How can I be full of nutrients for my ecosystem, And so that's a bit the question that we're asking. I mean, again, we are making mistakes and trying, just like in science. They had all the chances to make mistakes and try and use humans as their own, experiments, but we're not doing that. We're just trying and failing, in our own, behind the scenes tables. So that's the chance that I wanted to say. We can't innovate if we don't allow ourselves the imperfection of trying. And again, to the point that we were saying about purism, that is colonialism. Colonialism is embedded in the left, embedded in the notion of purism and, oh, I thought you were an activist, or I thought you were an environmentalist, or I thought you were this and that. And what are you? What are you? You know, do something, you know? And if you can't do anything because you're afraid to be not perfect enough, then you don't get to talk, and you don't get to come for me, and you don't get to come for any of us. Your criticism is invalid, does not matter, because what you're presenting is, you know, an abstract notion of an idea that's super colonial, like it doesn't exist. So at the end of the day, it's allowing ourselves to create this new sets of values that we can say, yes, okay, that's okay, you did this mistake, and let's keep going, you know, like, let's keep going.
Yeah, what really just stood out for me, this question of how can I be filled with enough nutrients or nutrients for my ecosystem, I think is so key, and something that each of us should probably be writing down right now. Definitely something I'm going to be sitting with this evening. Yeah, there was so much in there. There was so much, and I'm really appreciating just again how both of you actually talked about the real vulnerability of trying, the real vulnerability of saying I care, and also how necessary it is as a designer to be working with constraints and prioritization. That's something I think a lot about in climate justice spaces is how is it that we are or I am prioritizing my own family, my community, you know, or not. And how is it that I can come back into my own form of balance for my ecosystem? So Jade, our fight as Indigenous peoples for survival is at this point generational, and in many ways our communities are some of the most versed in the reality of surviving apocalypse because we've lived through many at this point. So wanting to remind that the root of the word apocalypse stemming from Greek, meaning to lay bare, disclose, or reveal, which I feel like is really the themes of so much of this dialogue this evening, really could not be more accurate to this moment in history. And, you know, yet here in our campaign, we continue to ask and challenge each other to continue asking, what if the best times are ahead? Which is a complete reframe. So what does it look like for our communities and our extended kin to not just survive, but to thrive? And what does dreaming the Indigenous dream of climate justice look like and feel like?
Yeah, these questions are deep and so much. Well, first I'll start with what if the best times are ahead of us? So this actually, I'll just share a bit of the story of NDN here. This question came to our founder and CEO in ceremony. Spirits brought this question to Nick, and we've adopted it in our campaign because with climate justice and climate work, it's every day. It's the opposite news. It's or like the opposite kind of or the other spectrum of like feeling and a lack of that hope. It's really like a lot of doom and a lot of fear and like it's done. Like y'all are done for. And there's some truth to that. There's reality in that. But I really appreciate bringing this question into our work. And this is a question I actually like to think about every day and just use it as meditation because it reminds me of why I'm doing this work. So connecting it to what Nicole and Celine were saying, you know, what if the best times were ahead of us? Well, what if we were organized enough to have a democracy that actually worked for us? What if we tried and allowed ourselves to try and make mistakes, but we were graceful, we were gentle with each other in a way that it was regenerative, and we learned, and community was stronger. What if design was better, and each of these buildings that we're surrounded by was built in a way that it was offsetting gases, and that's what this question, I think, well, at least for me in this campaign work or in this program, that's what it, I guess, inspires. As far as what it looks like for us to thrive and survive, I mean, a lot of these models, I keep pointing to these things because I think there's a lot of vagueness in our work, environmentalism, climate work, because it is an existential problem. So no wonder, there's kind of vague responses. So we always hear let Indigenous people lead, build Indigenous solutions. And sometimes we fail to show, I'm a very show, don't tell person. And so I think, that's why I'm drawing attention to those boards over there. And that's why we did that. We thought about these things. But yeah, those models, where it's a holistic, it's a design, it's tackling housing, it's tackling how we get our energy, revitalizing culture, those models over there, those are what I am seeing now as people thriving. I flew here from Alaska, where I sit on the board of Native Conservancy, which is on one of those boards, and shout out to Dune, who gave us the fish that we are eating this evening, who caught it and everything, and we trekked it over. But this community, through us dismantling white supremacy and philanthropy, we're able to move resources over to them, and they're able to build an Indigenous economy based off fish and kelp, and it's giving the young EAC people jobs. It's creating this circular system that is really just beautiful, and people are happy, so happy. Dune, when I'm with him, he's always just how is this even real? How is this even possible? These are he's such an animated person. And yeah, I think for me, those examples that we're showcasing are the ones that I'm seeing now of how we're thriving and surviving. And I forgot to mention earlier in your first question, our land work and the land back work that NDN is doing. So we also have the land back campaign, which is building momentum in so many ways. And we're not the first people to do land back work, but there's just a huge, we were talking about healing scarcity mentality. And I think when we're able to return to land, that scarcity mentality is shattered, because we're able to connect back with abundance, which I think, what if the best times are ahead of us? What if we had land and abundance to take care of each other, and prepare and be prepared, and not just, panicking and chaos while climate change is coming at us. I think return to land is also another example. Return of land, rematriation of land is another example of our people thriving, because we can be connected to abundance, which then creates a culture of us taking care of each other.
Thank you for that really beautiful closing note, Jade. The importance of being able to care for each other is so fundamental to what it actually means to be a human being. And I think it's something that we all really actually want to be doing, is caring for each other. I also wanted to, just say too, thank you for bringing in the Land Back campaign, the Land Back work. which is so core and crucial to climate change mitigation efforts. You know, in order for us to continue to draw down carbon and actually have our land and be implementing our practices, you know, we actually just need people to be giving the land back in large quantities every single day is actually what it comes down to. And I did want to just also say that in the required reading book, we actually have a piece in there. There's so much questions, so many questions from non-Indigenous peoples around what does land back mean? Is it literal? We have 2 pieces in there. One of them is called Land Back, a meta-narrative that actually talks about the history of the American Indian movement, colonization, and also how our you know, movements with our Black relatives and Indigenous peoples, how they're braided together and have built upon each other and supported each other, and what it actually, you know, land back as a meta-narrative looks like in this day and age. So it gives a great explanation of what we mean. And then we also have another piece in there from one of our land back campaigners, Demetrius Johnson, which you know, is very much just from the ground. This is what we're doing. This is what this campaign looks like. So I'd highly recommend checking those pieces out. And I want to say thank you to each of you for sitting up here with me this evening, for coming to this event, for sharing so much of what it is that you're up to. Each of you are holding big pieces to a complex puzzle, but you also have a real ability, I can see, to hold a huge perspective. And I'm so grateful that you're each holding a puzzle piece. So thank you so much. And we started the panel a little late, so we're gonna close, but I wanna say that all these incredible people are here and they'll be around, and if there are questions or a desire for continuing conversation, yeah, I'm sure they would welcome a conversation. So thank you again for coming out this evening, and I hope you all rest well. I hope these questions that were raised tonight nourish you in your dreams.
And shout out to our amazing moderator, Kailea. Just a couple of housekeeping things. So if you hadn't
what I really want is for all these pipelines to be stopped, because we deserve clean water.
I'm here to say honor our treaties and respect our treaties. Remember the promise he made to us.
We're not here to ask him, we're here to demand that he fulfills the promises that he made to us. Our communities came out in large numbers to vote him into office, and now he needs to follow through.